I'm Garrett, 32, and 3 weeks ago I thought I had it all: a stable career, a comfortable apartment, a girlfriend of 3 years, and a brother I trusted despite our differences. Then came that rainy Thursday when Trevor burst through my door, called me worthless in front of Natalie, and somehow convinced her to throw me out of my own apartment. They never expected the Weakling to fight back. They certainly never imagined I'd be the one ignoring their desperate calls while rebuilding a better life. Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness until they see what happens when you push too far. If you've ever been underestimated, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join me for a story about finding strength they never knew I had. Before everything fell apart, my life was comfortable, if perhaps a bit predictable. I'd been working as a software developer at Meridian Technologies for 6 years, where I'd built a reputation for reliability and attention to detail. I wasn't the flashiest coder, but I was the one they called when critical systems needed maintenance or difficult bugs required patient troubleshooting. My approach to life mirrored my coding philosophy: methodical, careful, and focused on long-term stability rather than quick, showy solutions. Natalie and I met at a friend's housewarming party. She worked in marketing, all creativity and spontaneity to my structure and planning. For 3 years, we balanced each other well. At least I thought we did. We had talked about marriage recently, even browsed rings online together. When I finally saved enough for a down payment on a modest but nice 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood, she helped choose the furniture and decor. I remember how proud I felt when we hosted our first dinner party there, Natalie charming everyone while I grilled steaks on the small balcony. "You've really built something nice here, Garrett," my friend Marcus had said that night, clinking his beer bottle against mine. "You guys are perfect together." I believed him. Looking back, I should have noticed how Natalie would occasionally make comments about settling down too soon, or wonder aloud about friends who were traveling internationally or taking career risks. But I was secure in our relationship, confident that our different approaches to life complemented each other. My brother Trevor was everything I wasn't. 2 years younger but seemingly decades ahead in confidence, he'd been the star athlete in high school while I was in computer club. He went to college on a partial baseball scholarship, where he majored in business and minored in partying. Our parents never explicitly favored him, but they beamed with pride at his games and social confidence in a way they never quite managed when looking at my academic achievements. Growing up, Trevor's charisma got him out of trouble as often as it got him into it. He'd break a neighbor's window playing ball, then charm them so completely they'd invite him in for cookies. He borrowed my carefully saved allowance repeatedly with grand promises of repayment that never materialized. When I complained to our parents, they'd sigh and say, "That's just how Trevor is. You need to learn to stand up for yourself, Garrett." Despite this history, I still wanted to believe the best of my brother. We weren't close as adults, meeting mostly at family gatherings where he'd dominate conversations with stories of business deals and dating conquests, occasionally throwing an arm around my shoulders to ask, "How's the computer stuff going?" before interrupting with another of his adventures before I could properly answer. So when Trevor called me claiming he'd lost his job at Maxwell Investments due to corporate politics and needed a place to stay, just for a few weeks, I hesitated. He'd recently broken up with his girlfriend, he explained, and his lease was ending anyway. Perfect timing to regroup at his big brother's place. "I don't know, Trevor," I said, remembering the last time I'd loaned him money for what he'd called a sure-thing investment opportunity that mysteriously never paid dividends. "Come on, Garrett," he'd replied, his voice taking on that familiar cajoling tone that had worked on me since childhood. "I'm in a tough spot here. Family helps family, right? I'd do the same for you." I doubted that, but guilt is a powerful motivator. I consulted with Natalie, who surprisingly supported the idea. "It might be fun having him around," she said. "Your apartment can feel a little quiet sometimes. Plus, family is important." When Trevor arrived with just 2 suitcases and his trademark grin, I noticed Natalie perk up immediately. He brought an energy into our space, telling animated stories about celebrities he claimed to have met through work, making Natalie laugh in a way I hadn't heard in months. "Your brother is so much fun," she whispered to me that first night as we got ready for bed. "I can see why everyone loves him." I nodded, but something in my stomach tightened when she added, "It's hard to believe you two are related sometimes." That first week, Trevor made breakfast for everyone, kept the conversation lively at dinner, and seemed genuinely grateful for our hospitality. But I noticed small comments slipping into his stories: how settled my life seemed, how he could never handle such a predictable routine, how some people were built for adventure, while others needed security. Each comment was delivered with a smile and often followed by, "But hey, that's why we get along so well, right? We balance each other out." If Natalie noticed these subtle digs, she didn't mention them. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that old competitive feelings from childhood were coloring my perception. But as days turned into weeks, the comments became more frequent, the smiles less convincing, and the contrast Trevor drew between us increasingly unflattering. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home, doubting choices I'd been confident about for years. Trevor's presence quickly transformed from temporary guest to dominating force. My carefully arranged living room became his domain, with clothes draped over my furniture, empty protein shake containers on the coffee table, and his expensive cologne lingering in the air. Despite his unemployment, he somehow had money for new workout equipment that now occupied the corner where my reading chair once sat. "Just moved it to the bedroom, bro," he'd said when I mentioned it. "You never use it anyway. Always on that laptop." The first weekend, he invited 3 of his friends over without asking. I came home from grocery shopping to find strange men drinking my beer and watching sports on maximum volume. "Garrett! There he is!" Trevor had announced as if I were the unexpected guest. "Guys, this is my big brother. Computer genius. Don't let the quiet demeanor fool you, he's got it all figured out." His friends nodded politely before immediately returning to their conversation, something about women they'd met at a club. I put away groceries while listening to Trevor join in, describing encounters in graphic detail that made me uncomfortable, especially with Natalie due home any minute. "Maybe tone it down a bit," I suggested quietly. Trevor rolled his eyes at his friends. "See what I mean? Always the responsible one." Then to me, louder, "Relax, Garrett. It's Saturday. Live a little." When Natalie arrived, Trevor immediately included her in the group, offering her beer and introducing her to his friends with his arm casually resting on her shoulder. To my surprise, she settled right in, laughing at their stories and even sharing a few of her own from her college days. Stories she'd never told me. The pattern escalated from there. Trevor's playful mocking became a regular feature at dinner. He'd recall embarrassing childhood incidents, always prefaced with, "Remember when Garrett?" followed by some humiliating moment. "Remember when Garrett tried out for basketball and tripped over his own feet in the first minute? Coach didn't even let him finish the tryout." Natalie would try not to laugh at first, but Trevor's delivery was always perfectly calibrated for maximum humor at my expense. Soon she was asking for more stories, and each evening became a highlight reel of my past failures. When I showed interest in learning basic woodworking and bought supplies for a small shelf project, Trevor picked up one of my carefully selected tools and chuckled. "Woodworking? Seriously? Your hands are softer than most women I've dated." He flexed his own arm. "These are working man's muscles, built through actual physical labor. But hey, hobbies are cool too, I guess." Natalie, who had initially seemed excited about my new interests, glanced between us and something shifted in her expression. After that, she never asked about the project again. The supplies gathered dust in the corner. Trevor's comments about my physical appearance became more frequent and pointed. He started insisting I join him for workouts, then making sure Natalie noticed when I couldn't match his repetitions or weights. "Just trying to help you out, bro," he'd say, slapping my back while catching Natalie's eye in the mirror. "Women appreciate a man who takes care of himself." His dismissiveness toward my career stung most of all. Despite the fact that my boring, Job paid for the apartment he was living in. He constantly implied that I'd settled for mediocrity. Garrett's smart, don't get me wrong, he told Natalie over dinner one night. He could have been anything. But some people prefer comfort over challenge. Not like my work in investment banking. One mistake costs millions, but the rewards. He whistled. The bonuses I've seen would make your head spin. I noticed Natalie asking more questions about Trevor's career than she'd ever asked about mine. When I mentioned late meetings or coding challenges, her eyes would glaze over, but she hung on Trevor's every word about corporate politics and client dinners. After 3 weeks of this, I confided in my friend Marcus during lunch. It sounds like he's trying to undermine you, Marcus said, frowning. And with Natalie right there? That's messed up. I'm probably overreacting, I replied, stirring my coffee. It's just how he's always been. Marcus shook his head. Just because it's familiar doesn't make it okay. And I don't like how Natalie's responding. Have you talked to her about it? I hadn't. Somehow, voicing my concerns felt like confirming Trevor's narrative, that I was insecure, overly sensitive, not confident enough to take a joke. Still, Marcus's worry stayed with me, and that evening I tried talking to Trevor while Natalie was out with friends. I appreciate you staying here, I began carefully. But some of the comments, especially in front of Natalie. Trevor's expression changed instantly, all traces of his usual charm vanishing. Are you serious right now? I'm just joking around. Don't tell me you're this fragile. It's not about being fragile, I insisted. It's about respect. Respect? He laughed. Garrett, I respect the hell out of you. You're my brother. But maybe if you're this worried about what Natalie thinks, there are bigger issues in your relationship. There weren't issues until you arrived, I said, instantly regretting my directness. Trevor's eyes narrowed briefly before his face relaxed into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Look, I'm sorry if my being here is causing problems. I'll be more considerate. The last thing I want is to come between you guys. I wanted to believe him, but his behavior only worsened after our talk. His comments became more subtle but more pointed, always carefully constructed to make me look inadequate while maintaining plausible deniability. That weekend, I overheard him and Natalie laughing in the kitchen. I paused in the hallway, not intending to eavesdrop until I heard my name. Garrett's a great guy, Trevor was saying. But between us, I've always worried he's selling himself short. He gets comfortable and just stops pushing, you know? You seem like someone who wants more from life. There was a pause before Natalie replied. Sometimes I do wonder if we want the same things long term. I didn't hear Trevor's response, but their laughter afterward felt like a physical blow. I retreated to our bedroom, deciding that I needed to have a serious conversation with Natalie about our relationship and about Trevor's extended stay. I texted her about having a special dinner the following night, just the two of us, to talk about important things. She responded with a simple, "Sounds good," which was shorter than her usual enthusiastic messages. I spent the next day planning what to say, how to express my concerns without sounding jealous or controlling. I even bought ingredients for her favorite meal, determined to reconnect and rebuild what felt increasingly fragile. The day I had planned for our important conversation started with promise. I woke early, carefully laid out the ingredients for dinner, and left a note for Natalie with a heart drawn next to my "Looking forward to tonight" message. Trevor was still asleep when I left for work, which was a relief. I didn't want his knowing smirk ruining my determined optimism. At Meridian Technologies, I had just settled into coding when our project manager Walter burst into the development room, face flushed with panic. "The Hartman banking system is down," he announced to the team. "Complete database corruption. They can't process any transactions and they're losing millions by the minute." The room erupted in activity. The Hartman contract was our biggest client, and this kind of failure could destroy not just the relationship but potentially our entire company. As the senior developer who had worked most extensively on their system, I found all eyes turning to me. "Garrett, your lead on this," Walter said. "Whatever you need, whoever you need." Just get it fixed. I immediately texted Natalie. Major crisis at work. We'll try to make dinner but might be late. I'm so sorry. This is really important. Her response came quickly. No problem. Take your time. For the next 8 hours, I barely looked up from my screen, working through the corrupted data structures, identifying the cascade failure points, and methodically rebuilding critical pathways. My team brought me coffee and sandwiches that went cold as I worked. By hour 6, my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, but we were making progress. You're saving us here, Walter said, squeezing my shoulder as he checked in for the 10th time. The Hartman CTO actually sounded impressed with our response time. At 9:30 p.m., exhausted but successful, I finally pushed the restored system to production. The team watched anxiously as the system came back online, databases reconnected, and transactions began processing again. When confirmation came through that everything was functioning correctly, spontaneous applause broke out. Incredible work, everyone, Walter announced. Especially you, Garrett. Take tomorrow off. You've earned it. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a career triumph, something to celebrate. But all I could think about was Natalie and our missed dinner. I checked my phone, surprised to find no messages from her asking about my timing. I texted a quick update. Finally fixed it. Coming home now. Still up for talking? No response came during my drive home. I picked up a bouquet of flowers from an all-night grocery store, a poor substitute for the dinner I'd planned but a peace offering nonetheless. Despite everything with Trevor, despite my growing concerns, I still believed Natalie and I could work through this rough patch. We'd been solid for 3 years. Surely this was just a temporary disruption. When I unlocked my apartment door at 10:15 p.m., the scene that greeted me seemed surreal. Trevor and Natalie sat close together on the couch, wine glasses in hand, her laughter cutting off abruptly as they noticed me. The ingredients I'd laid out that morning were untouched on the counter. Instead, takeout containers from an expensive restaurant I couldn't afford on regular occasions littered the coffee table. Look who finally made it home, Trevor said, his tone making home sound like a questionable concept. Natalie didn't move to greet me. The flowers suddenly felt ridiculous in my hand. The system crashed, I explained, looking at Natalie. Hardman banking. It was all hands on deck. Must be nice having a crisis to escape to, Trevor replied before Natalie could speak. Some of us have to deal with real life head on. I frowned, exhaustion making it harder to filter my response. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Trevor set down his wine glass and stood, suddenly seeming larger in the space that was technically mine. Why don't you tell him what we were just discussing, Natalie? She looked uncomfortable for the first time, glancing between us. Trevor, maybe now isn't the best time. When is the best time? He's always working or making excuses. Trevor turned to me. We were talking about you, brother. About this relationship that's clearly going nowhere. I stood frozen, flowers still in hand, as Trevor continued, his voice taking on a performative quality, as if he'd rehearsed this speech. Let's be honest about what Natalie deserves. She deserves someone who excites her, challenges her. Someone who can protect her and provide a real future, not just a safe, boring existence coding in a cubicle. He moved closer to me. She deserves a real man, not someone who lets his little brother walk all over him in his own apartment. I looked at Natalie, waiting for her to object, to defend me, to show any sign that these weren't thoughts she'd shared with him. Her silence was deafening. Natalie? I finally managed. She stood then, but moved beside Trevor rather than me. He's right, Garrett. I've been trying to figure out how to say this. I care about you, but I don't think we want the same things. You're so content with everything. Never pushing for more. I just saved my company millions of dollars, I said incredulously. I bought this apartment for us. We talked about marriage. And that's exactly it. Trevor interrupted. Your big ambition is a 2-bedroom apartment and a mediocre job that barely pays the bills. Natalie needs excitement, passion, someone who can match her energy. Someone like you, I suppose? I asked, the pieces finally, horribly falling into place. Trevor smiled, all pretense of brotherly concern vanishing. She has to choose, of course. But yes, someone like me. Someone who won't bore her to death with stability and caution. He turned to Natalie, his expression softening in a way I recognized from countless childhood manipulations. You know what you want. You've known for weeks. It's time to make a choice. The moment stretched painfully as I waited, still somehow believing she would choose 3 years of relationship over whatever fantasy Trevor had spun for her. I'm sorry, Garrett, she finally said, not meeting my eyes. Trevor's right. I need more than what we have. The betrayal hit like physical pain. Not just from Natalie, which was devastating enough, but from my own brother. The person who was supposed to have my back no matter what. What happened next remains a blur in my memory. Natalie began gathering my things, stuffing clothes into a gym bag. I remember protesting that this was my apartment, my name on the lease, but Trevor's mocking laughter drowned me out. You think that matters? You're not going to throw Natalie out. You don't have it in you. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. You never have. Always the good boy, always following rules, always backing down. It's pathetic. Somehow I found myself outside my own door, a hastily packed bag at my feet, watching as Natalie tossed the flowers I'd brought back at me. They hit the hallway floor, petals scattering. Don't call me, she said coldly. We're done. The door slammed, but not before I caught Trevor's triumphant smirk over her shoulder. I stood there for several minutes, unable to process what had just happened. Rain had started outside, visible through the hallway window. In some distant part of my mind, I registered the symbolic cruelty of being thrown out into a storm, like a scene from a bad movie. I called Natalie repeatedly as I walked aimlessly through the rain, each call going straight to voicemail. By the time I found myself outside Marcus's apartment building, I was soaked through and shivering, my phone battery nearly dead. Marcus opened his door, took one look at me, and pulled me inside without questions. Only when he'd given me dry clothes and a stiff drink did I finally manage to explain what had happened. Your own brother? He kept saying, his expression moving from shock to disgust to rage. With Natalie? In your apartment? I nodded numbly, the reality still not fully registering. That's beyond messed up, Garrett. I don't even have words. Neither did I. For the first time in my adult life, I broke down completely, my carefully constructed composure shattering as Marcus awkwardly patted my shoulder, offering tissues and more whiskey. You can stay here as long as you need, he said when I'd finally quieted. We'll figure this out. But in that moment, huddled in borrowed clothes in my friend's spare room, I couldn't imagine how anything would ever be figured out again. The days after my expulsion from my own apartment blurred together in a haze of disbelief and pain. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done without legitimate illness before. Marcus didn't push me to talk, just made sure I ate occasionally and had clean clothes from the emergency shopping trip he insisted on when it became clear I couldn't return home for my belongings. You look like you're dressed for a funeral, he commented on the third day, eyeing the dark colors I'd chosen. Maybe I am, I replied. The death of everything I thought I knew. For days after the confrontation, still huddled in Marcus's guest room, I made the mistake of checking social media. There they were, Trevor and Natalie at a rooftop bar, his arm around her waist, her smile bright as she leaned into him. The caption read, "Sometimes the best things in life have been right in front of you all along." The comments were worse. Friends who knew we were together expressing surprise but offering congratulations. Trevor responding with winking emojis and comments like, "When you know, you know." I scrolled back through Natalie's timeline and found subtle changes over the weeks since Trevor had moved in. Fewer pictures of us together. More group shots where she stood closer to Trevor than me. The evidence of their growing connection had been there all along, digital breadcrumbs of betrayal I'd been too trusting to notice. Worse still, I discovered messages between them going back nearly a month before the confrontation. Nothing explicitly romantic at first, but increasingly familiar, inside jokes developing, late-night conversations when I was asleep or working. Marcus found me staring blankly at my phone. "Stop torturing yourself," he said, gently taking it from my hand. "This isn't helping. I need to understand how this happened," I insisted. "It happened because your brother is a manipulative jerk and Natalie wasn't who you thought she was," Marcus replied bluntly. "There's nothing more complicated to understand." But I couldn't accept that. There had to be something I'd missed, some warning sign I'd ignored. The software developer in me needed to debug the failure, identify the exact point where things had gone wrong. On day 5, I finally checked my bank accounts and discovered another layer to Trevor's betrayal. There were charges I didn't recognize: expensive restaurants, high-end clothing stores, even a weekend booking at a luxury hotel dated for the upcoming weekend. All on my credit card, which I'd stupidly let Trevor use once for groceries when he claimed to have left his wallet at the gym. "He's been planning this," I said to Marcus, showing him the transactions. "Using my money to woo my girlfriend while living in my apartment." Marcus's expression darkened. "That's literal fraud, Garrett. You need to report this." The financial violation somehow broke through my emotional fog where the personal betrayal hadn't. This was tangible, documentable harm. This could be addressed through systems and procedures, things I understood. Further investigation revealed more disturbing facts. The apartment lease was solely in my name, making Trevor and Natalie illegal occupants if I chose to pursue that angle. Trevor hadn't lost his job as he'd claimed. He'd been fired for ethical violations involving client information. And now he was interviewing for positions at competing firms, using credential claims that I knew were exaggerated at best, fabricated at worst. He's always been like this, I told Marcus as we sorted through the evidence I was compiling. Taking shortcuts, bending rules, charming his way out of consequences. But this is different. It's criminal, Marcus said simply. And you need to start thinking about this differently. This isn't just your brother being a jerk anymore. This is someone deliberately causing you harm. That perspective shift was critical. As long as I viewed the situation through the lens of family drama or relationship problems, I remained paralyzed by emotional confusion. But reframing it as a straightforward case of fraud and manipulation clarified my options. The turning point came unexpectedly. My boss Walter called, concerned about my absence. "Garrett, you've never taken 3 sick days in a row before. The team is worried. Are you really sick or is something else going on?" I nearly gave a vague answer, but something in his genuine concern broke through my isolation. I found myself explaining the situation in technical terms, as if reporting a complex system failure. "I see," Walter said when I finished. "That's quite a situation. How can I help?" The question caught me off guard. "Help?" "Yes, help. You just saved our biggest client single-handedly. The least I can do is offer support when you're dealing with personal challenges." That simple offer of assistance opened a door I hadn't realized was closed. Over the next 2 days, other unexpected supports emerged. My coworker Ethan stopped by Marcus's place with home-cooked meals and office updates. My neighbor Mrs. Chen called, wondering why she'd seen that loud young man and a different woman entering my apartment but not me. Each interaction reinforced what Marcus had been trying to tell me: I wasn't alone, and what had happened wasn't my fault. With this growing support network and newfound clarity, I began to plan strategically rather than react emotionally. I met with a lawyer friend of Walter's who specialized in tenant law and financial fraud. I documented the unauthorized credit card charges and filed disputes with the bank. I researched Trevor's pattern of similar behavior in previous relationships and jobs. Most importantly, I started rebuilding my sense of self separate from Trevor's narrative. For years, I'd accepted his characterization of me as the boring, weak older brother, the cautious rule follower to his exciting risk-taker. I'd internalized that identity so completely that when he used it to steal my girlfriend and my apartment, some part of me believed I deserved it. You know what actual strength is? Marcus asked me over beers one evening, 2 weeks after what we now called the incident. I shook my head. It's what you're doing right now. Getting knocked down harder than most people ever experience, and methodically finding your way back up. Not through revenge or violence or dramatics. Through integrity and perseverance. His words resonated with something I'd always known but had forgotten under years of Trevor's undermining. My carefulness wasn't weakness. My reliability wasn't boring. My integrity wasn't a limitation. I'm not going to seek revenge, I decided, outlining my approach to Marcus. I'm going to seek justice. I'm going to let Trevor's actions have their natural consequences without interference from me. No lies, no manipulation, just truth. Marcus raised his beer bottle. To justice, then. And to finding out who your real friends are. As my plan took shape, I felt something unfamiliar replacing the hurt and confusion, a calm, steady resolve. Trevor had always believed I would back down, give in, let him win to avoid conflict. He had no idea what I was capable of when pushed past my breaking point. My return to work marked the beginning of my strategic comeback. I arrived early, showered and dressed in new clothes that Marcus had insisted. Make a statement. When Walter saw me, his relieved smile confirmed I'd made the right decision. Welcome back, he said. The team's been lost without you. In the break room, coworkers greeted me with genuine warmth. Some knew vague details of my situation through office gossip, others simply knew I'd been out after saving the Hartman account. Either way, their respect was palpable and surprisingly healing. Later that day, Walter called me into his office. I expected questions about my readiness to work, maybe concerns about my focus. Instead, he closed the door and spoke candidly. The Hartman situation showed me something, Garrett. You handled a crisis that would have broken most people, and you did it with exceptional skill. Then I learned you were dealing with personal betrayal at the same time? He shook his head. That demonstrates a level of professionalism and mental fortitude that's rare. I started to dismiss the compliment, my usual reaction, but stopped myself. Thank you. It was challenging but important work. We're restructuring the development team, Walter continued. I need someone to lead the new Enterprise Solutions division. Someone methodical, reliable, and capable under pressure. I'd like that person to be you. The promotion offer was unexpected, significantly higher salary and responsibility. The old me might have hesitated, questioned whether I was ready. Instead, I simply said, I'd be honored. When do we start? Walter's surprised smile told me he'd expected more hesitation too. Monday. And Garrett? I know reliability isn't flashy. But it's worth its weight in gold in this business. That validation from someone I respected professionally strengthened my resolve as I implemented the next phases of my plan. With my lawyer's guidance, I filed a formal fraud complaint about the credit card charges, complete with documentation showing Trevor had used my card without authorization. I sent a certified letter regarding the apartment lease violation, establishing a paper trail for potential eviction proceedings. The letter was carefully worded, professional rather than emotional, giving them legal notice without revealing my full strategy. Perhaps most consequentially, I contacted the HR department at Blackwell Financial, where Trevor was in final interviews for a position that would give him access to sensitive client information. I didn't lie or exaggerate. I simply provided documentation of his history of ethical violations and credential misrepresentations, information they had every right to know before making their hiring decision. Throughout this process, I was rebuilding my support network. I reconnected with friends who had drifted away during my relationship with Natalie, many of whom Trevor had subtly alienated with his competing charm offensive. I strengthened my friendship with Marcus, whose unwavering support had been my lifeline, and built new connections with coworkers like Ethan who had shown genuine concern during my absence. The most difficult conversation was with my parents. I had avoided telling them immediately, knowing their complicated history of unconsciously favoring Trevor while expecting more from me. When I finally called them 3 weeks after the incident, my approach was different from my usual conflict avoidance style. "I need to tell you something serious about Trevor," I began, "and I need you to listen completely before responding." To my surprise, they did. I laid out the facts methodically, without emotional coloring but without minimizing the betrayal either. When I finished, the silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "He did what?" my father finally said, his voice uncharacteristically small. "With your girlfriend? In your apartment?" my mother added, sounding equally stunned. "Yes," I confirmed. "And he's currently living there with her, using my credit card, and interviewing for jobs using falsified credentials." More silence, then my father cleared his throat. "Garrett, I don't know what to say. This isn't a misunderstanding or brotherly competition. This is something else entirely. We had no idea he could do something like this," my mother added. To his own brother. Their shocked reaction was validating but also revealed how little they had understood Trevor's true nature all these years. I didn't push that painful realization, focusing instead on the present. "I'm taking legal steps to address the fraud and tenancy issues," I explained. "I'm not asking you to choose sides, but I wanted you to know the truth directly from me." "Of course we choose sides," my father responded immediately. "You're the victim here. Trevor's actions are inexcusable." Their unequivocal support was unexpected and healing. They offered financial help, which I politely declined, and emotional support, which I gratefully accepted. It was the first time I could remember them seeing Trevor's behavior clearly, without the filter of charm that had always excused his actions. As my external situation improved, I also focused on my psychological recovery. I began sessions with a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, working through the complex emotions of being hurt by the two people I should have been able to trust most. "What you're describing is a lifelong pattern of psychological manipulation from your brother," Dr. Winters explained during our third session. "You were conditioned to doubt yourself, to believe his narrative about you being weak or boring. Breaking free of that conditioning is a significant psychological achievement." Those sessions helped me recognize the strength I'd always possessed but never acknowledged. My stability wasn't dullness but reliability. My caution wasn't fear but wisdom. My conflict avoidance wasn't weakness but a preference for harmony that Trevor had exploited. The irony, I told Marcus after a particularly insightful therapy session, is that Trevor's biggest betrayal might end up being the best thing that ever happened to me. "How do you figure?" he asked. It forced me to see him clearly for the first time. And in doing that, I had to see myself clearly too. By the 6-week mark, my methodical approach began yielding results. The credit card company's investigation concluded in my favor, reversing all fraudulent charges and opening a formal case against Trevor. My new apartment was secured, in a better building with improved security. My promotion at work was announced, bringing congratulations and a new level of professional respect. And then the first messages started arriving from Trevor and Natalie. They began as angry accusations. How dare I report the credit card charges? What kind of brother would do that? Did I really think I could throw them out of our apartment? Trevor's texts vacillated between threats and attempts to make me feel guilty for overreacting to a relationship issue. Natalie's messages were more subdued but equally manipulative. She claimed she'd been confused, that Trevor had pressured her, that she'd made a mistake. She asked to talk, to explain, to make things right somehow. I saved every message without responding. Each one revealed more about their true characters, especially as their situations grew more desperate. The credit card investigation meant Trevor had to actually pay for things himself. The apartment notification meant they needed to find new housing quickly. Trevor's job prospect at Blackwell Financial disappeared overnight. As their tone shifted from angry to panicked, I maintained complete silence. No response, no engagement, no emotional reaction they could use against me. Just meticulous documentation for potential legal proceedings and the quiet satisfaction of watching natural consequences unfold. They're showing up at my place now, Marcus reported one evening. Trevor was demanding to know where you're staying. I told him to leave before I called security. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, I said. Marcus waved it off. Are you kidding? Watching him unravel is the most satisfying thing I've seen in years. He kept saying this isn't like Garrett, as if he's shocked you finally stood up to him. That was the key insight. Trevor's entire strategy had been built on the assumption that I would follow the same patterns I always had. That I would back down, give in, prioritize peace over justice. He had no contingency plan for a version of me that held firm boundaries and demanded accountability. As my official move-in date for the new apartment approached, I prepared for potential confrontation. Marcus and Ethan volunteered to help retrieve my remaining belongings from the old apartment, a process I had arranged through my lawyer to happen while Trevor was known to be at a job interview. What if they try to stop us? Ethan asked as we drove over. They won't, I replied with newfound confidence. The law is on our side, and Trevor has never faced consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. He doesn't know how to handle this situation. I was right. When we arrived, Natalie was there alone, clearly surprised by our appearance with the property manager and my documented list of belongings. She attempted to engage me emotionally, alternating between teary apologies and attempts to explain what really happened. I remained polite but distant, focusing on efficiently collecting my things with Marcus and Ethan's help. When she tried to follow me into the bedroom, Marcus gently but firmly stepped between us. This isn't a conversation, Natalie, he said. This is a property retrieval authorized by legal notice. Please step aside. Her frustration at being unable to provoke an emotional response was visible. As we packed the last box into Ethan's truck, she called after me. Trevor says you'll regret this, Garrett. You're making a huge mistake. I turned, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. No, Natalie. The mistake was already made. Not by me. As we drove away, Ethan whistled low. Man, that was ice cold. I didn't know you had it in you. I smiled slightly. Neither did they. That's the point. 7 weeks after Trevor's betrayal, the consequences of his actions began cascading through his life with a precision that even I found surprising. The credit card company's investigation concluded with a formal finding of fraud, triggering both financial penalties and a police report. The bank froze his accounts pending their own investigation into potential pattern fraud after discovering similar complaints from previous victims. The eviction notice arrived at my former apartment, giving them 30 days to vacate or face legal removal. My lawyer informed me that Trevor had called her office repeatedly, alternating between threats and pleas, trying to find some loophole or extension. Most devastating to Trevor's prospects, his job offer from Blackwell Financial was not only rescinded but turned into an industry warning. Financial firms maintain informal blacklists of high-risk candidates, and Trevor's name now featured prominently, his reputation for ethical violations and credential falsification effectively ending his aspirations in investment banking. I learned most of these developments secondhand, maintaining my policy of no direct contact. Marcus became my reluctant information conduit, reporting what he heard through mutual acquaintances. Trevor showed up at my office yesterday. He told me over dinner at my new apartment. Security had to escort him out. He was ranting about how you've ruined his life and demanding to know where you're living now. Did he threaten me? I asked, methodically serving the pasta I'd prepared. Not explicitly. But he's unraveling, Garrett. I've never seen him like this. The charm is gone. It's all desperation now. I nodded, unsurprised. Trevor's entire identity was built on being the successful, charismatic brother who could talk his way into or out of anything. Without that, who was he? What about Natalie? I asked, the question still causing a dull ache despite everything. Marcus hesitated. She's figuring out who the real Trevor is. Apparently he's been taking his frustrations out on her, blaming her for not handling you better. Their social media perfect couple act is definitely over. I felt no satisfaction at her suffering, only a distant sadness for what could have been. They deserve each other, I said finally. The professional consequences continued mounting for Trevor. Former colleagues distanced themselves as rumors of his behavior spread. Friends who had initially sided with him in what they perceived as a simple relationship triangle began avoiding his increasingly frantic calls as the full picture emerged. Even our parents, who had always made excuses for Trevor's behavior, finally established firm boundaries. When he called them demanding money for legal fees, my father refused. He actually told Trevor that he'd raised him better than this. My mother reported during our weekly call, her voice both sad and resolute, that there are lines you don't cross, especially with family. Trevor's response had apparently been explosive, resulting in my father hanging up and blocking his number, something I'd never imagined possible. As Trevor's options dwindled, his attempts to contact me grew more desperate. The calls increased from occasional to hourly. Text messages filled my phone, evolving from angry accusations to bargaining to outright pleading. "You've made your point," one read. "I messed up bad. But this is going too far. My whole life is falling apart." And later, "Please, Garrett. Just talk to me. I'm your brother. We can work this out." Natalie's messages followed a similar pattern but with her own twist. "I made a terrible mistake. Trevor isn't who I thought he was. Can we please just talk? I miss you so much." By week 8, the messages reached a fever pitch. In a single day, I received 21 missed calls and dozens of increasingly frantic texts, culminating in Natalie's all-caps, "Please answer," messages sent at 3-minute intervals throughout the evening. I showed the message log to Dr. Winters during our session. "How does this make you feel?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "Validated," I said finally. "Not happy, not vengeful. Just confirmed in my understanding of who they really are." She nodded. "And how are you deciding whether to respond?" "I'm not," I replied simply. "There's nothing to decide. They aren't entitled to my forgiveness or even my attention." "That's a powerful boundary," she observed. "Many people in your position would feel obligated to engage, especially with family." "The obligation was broken when Trevor betrayed me," I said. "I'm not punishing him. I'm protecting myself." That distinction was crucial to my healing. I wasn't orchestrating Trevor's downfall. I was simply refusing to shield him from the natural consequences of his actions. The difference kept me centered in justice rather than revenge. Meanwhile, my own life continued improving. My new role at Meridian Technologies challenged me professionally and came with recognition I'd never received before. My new apartment, while smaller than the previous one, felt more like home after just a few weeks. I'd even started tentatively accepting social invitations again, rebuilding a life entirely separate from Trevor and Natalie's drama. The final phase of Trevor's collapse came unexpectedly. A former colleague of his contacted me through LinkedIn, introducing herself as Diane from Maxwell Investments, Trevor's previous employer. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out," her message read. "I recently learned about what Trevor did to you, and it matches a pattern we observed at Maxwell before his termination. Several female colleagues experienced similar manipulation tactics. If you're pursuing any legal action, some of us would be willing to provide statements about his behavioral history." This unsolicited support from strangers who had experienced Trevor's manipulation firsthand provided the final pieces of a puzzle I'd been assembling for weeks. Trevor wasn't an otherwise good person who had made one terrible mistake with my girlfriend. He was a systematic manipulator whose behavior with me reflected a larger pattern affecting many others. Armed with this understanding and additional documentation, I finally agreed to my lawyer's suggestion of pursuing a restraining order based on Trevor's increasingly erratic contact attempts and veiled threats. The day after the paperwork was filed, Trevor somehow obtained my new address. I arrived home from work to find him sitting in the hallway outside my apartment, looking disheveled and desperate. "Garrett," he said, scrambling to his feet when he saw me. "Finally. We need to talk." I stopped at a safe distance, keeping my expression neutral. There's nothing to discuss, Trevor. You should leave before security arrives. Security? You called security on your own brother? His incredulity might have been convincing if I hadn't spent weeks recognizing his manipulation tactics. This is insane. All this over a girlfriend? This isn't about Natalie, I replied calmly. This is about who you are and who I am. You should have received legal notice about the restraining order petition today. This visit is violating those terms. His face contorted with a rage I recognized from childhood, the true emotion behind the charm when he didn't get his way. You can't do this to me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I can't get hired anywhere. My bank accounts are frozen. Natalie's threatening to go to the police about some bullshit claims I pressured her. I stepped around him to my door, key ready. Those all sound like consequences of your choices, Trevor. Not mine. As I moved to enter my apartment, he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. You don't walk away from me. You don't get to ruin my life and just walk away. For a moment, we stood frozen in that tableau, his rage against my calm. Then slowly, deliberately, I removed his hand from my arm. I'm not the one who walked away, I said quietly. You did that when you betrayed me. Everything since has been your choices coming home to roost. Security arrived then, responding to the silent alarm I triggered with my key fob. As they escorted a protesting Trevor from the building, I entered my apartment and locked the door behind me, hands shaking slightly but resolve stronger than ever. Later that evening, as I recounted the confrontation to Marcus over the phone, he asked a question I hadn't considered. After everything, do you hate him? I thought about it seriously. No, I finally answered. I don't hate him. I just see him clearly now. And I've stopped hating myself. 6 months after Trevor burst into my apartment and changed the course of my life, I stood in my new living room surveying the peaceful space I'd created. The promotion at Meridian Technologies had allowed me to afford better furnishings, including the custom bookshelves I'd built myself after finally completing that woodworking course. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Still on for dinner tonight? Ethan and Walter are confirmed. I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. My social circle had changed completely, shedding superficial connections for fewer but deeper friendships. These weekly dinners had become an anchor in my rebuilt life, a reminder that betrayal hadn't broken my capacity for trust, just refined my judgment about who deserved it. My relationship with my parents had transformed as well. Without Trevor's manipulative presence, we'd developed an adult relationship based on mutual respect rather than old patterns. They had apologized, tearfully and sincerely, for their years of enabling Trevor's behavior at my expense. I had forgiven them, understanding that his manipulation had affected them too. We're so proud of who you've become, my mother had said during their last visit, her eyes clear and direct in a way they'd never been when discussing her sons before. Not despite what happened, but because of how you handled it. The restraining order against Trevor had been granted 3 months earlier, after his confrontation at my apartment and subsequent escalating messages. Natalie had indeed filed police reports about coercion and emotional abuse, though I learned this only through legal notices as I maintained my policy of no contact with either of them. My lawyer Catherine had called the previous week with an update. Trevor's trying to negotiate dropping some of the financial penalties, she'd informed me. He's claiming hardship and family connection. What do you recommend? I'd asked. Legally, you're in a strong position to maintain all claims, she replied. But this is ultimately about what brings you peace. I had considered it carefully before responding. I'll drop the punitive damages claim if he agrees to mandatory counseling and maintaining the no-contact order. The actual fraud repayment stands. That's generous, Catherine had observed. Are you sure? It's not about generosity. I'd explained. I don't need his money. I need him to understand there are boundaries he can't cross. The counseling requirement does that better than additional financial penalties. After consulting with Marcus and Dr. Winters, I agreed to a single, final meeting with both Trevor and Natalie, arranged by Catherine in a neutral public location with both legal representation and Marcus present. Not for reconciliation, but for closure. The cafe where we agreed to meet was busy enough to discourage dramatics, but quiet enough for conversation. I arrived early with Marcus and Catherine, securing a corner table with clear sight lines to exits, a strategic approach that would have seemed paranoid to my former self but now felt like appropriate caution. Trevor arrived first, accompanied by his lawyer. He looked markedly different, thinner, less confident, the charming smile replaced by a wary, tired expression. He moved to embrace me before Catherine subtly intercepted, guiding him to the opposite side of the table. Natalie appeared minutes later, alone and visibly nervous. She had cut her hair short and dressed simply, nothing like the polished image she'd cultivated during our relationship. She sat beside Trevor but maintained a noticeable distance. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Trevor began, his voice lacking its usual performative quality. "I know you didn't have to. I'm here to finalize our legal arrangements," I replied evenly. "Not to rehash the past." Trevor nodded, glancing at his lawyer before continuing. "I understand. I want you to know I recognize how badly I messed up. With you, with everything," Natalie interjected, her voice small. "Me too, Garrett. What we did was unforgivable. I got caught up in in a fantasy that wasn't real. By the time I realized who he really was, everything was falling apart." I studied them both, noting the dynamic shift. No longer the confident betrayers throwing me out of my own home, but diminished figures seeking something I wasn't sure I could or should provide. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve today?" I asked directly. Trevor looked surprised by the question. "Forgiveness, I guess? A chance to explain? Maybe start rebuilding our relationship eventually?" I shook my head slightly. "I've agreed to modify the financial terms of our settlement. That's the extent of what's on offer today. But we're brothers," Trevor protested, a flash of his old manipulative tone emerging. "Family is supposed to forgive. Family is supposed to protect each other, not betray each other," I countered calmly. "You made your choice clear that night in my apartment. I'm simply honoring it." Natalie tried next, tears forming. "I know I hurt you terribly, Garrett. But what we had for 3 years, doesn't that mean anything? Can't we at least talk about it?" "We are talking," I replied. "But if you're asking whether we can rekindle our relationship, the answer is no. That's not a punishment. It's a consequence." The conversation continued in this vein, Trevor and Natalie alternating between apologies, explanations, and subtle attempts to shift responsibility or evoke sympathy. I listened without emotional engagement, a skill developed through months of therapy and reflection. "You know what I've realized?" I said finally, interrupting Trevor's third attempt to minimize his actions as a mistake. "The person you betrayed wasn't just me. It was yourselves. You compromised your own integrity, your own values. That's why you're here seeking forgiveness. Not for me, but for yourselves." Trevor fell silent, the observation landing with visible impact. Natalie looked down at her hands, a tear falling onto the table. "I do forgive you," I continued, surprising even myself with the truth of it. "Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger doesn't serve me anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean we pretend it never happened." "So that's it?" Trevor asked, a familiar edge of entitlement creeping into his voice. "You're just writing me off forever? Your own brother?" "I'm honoring the boundaries that will keep me healthy," I corrected. "Maybe someday that will include some form of distant contact. But not today, and not soon." As the legal details were finalized and papers signed, I felt a profound sense of closure. Not the Hollywood ending where everyone learns their lesson and reunites stronger than before, but the real-world resolution where painful experiences lead to growth, boundaries, and new beginnings. When we stood to leave, Natalie made one last attempt, touching my arm gently. "I really did love you, Garrett. I just lost my way." I stepped back, removing her hand as I had removed Trevor's that day outside my apartment. "I hope you find it again, Natalie. Just not with me." Walking away with Marcus beside me, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not from reconciliation, but from the final release of any obligation to manage their emotions or needs. My focus had rightfully returned to my own well-being and future. "You good?" Marcus asked as we left the cafe. "Better than good," I replied truthfully. Free. The lessons of the past 6 months had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. I had learned that true strength isn't about domination or control, but about integrity and resilience. That genuine friendship reveals itself during crisis, not comfort. That boundaries aren't selfish but essential for healthy relationships. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't defined by others' treatment of me, but by my own actions and choices. Trevor's betrayal had nearly broken me, but my response to it had revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. That evening, surrounded by friends who had stood by me through everything, I raised a glass in a private toast to the unexpected journey that had led me here. To finding strength in unexpected places, I said. And to becoming the person we're meant to be, even if we take the scenic route getting there. As we celebrated together, my phone remained silent. No desperate calls, no frantic texts. Just the peaceful absence of chaos and the presence of people who valued me for exactly who I was. Have you ever had someone underestimate you only to be shocked when you finally stood your ground? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of finding strength through betrayal resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes our greatest growth comes after our deepest pain. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, true strength isn't about never falling, it's about how you rise when you do.